There is so much cat hair on this desk. Are you happy? Do you like having your cat hair here? The eye of the world. Wait. The eye of the world. Wait. The eye of the world remarketed. Wait. The eye of the world. Wait. The eye of the world. Wait. No, not actually. I think that's my last copy that's
easily within reach.
Actually, no, I also had this one. I just forgot it. It was right there to the right on the lower shelf. I also had this one. And fun fact, when I tell the story about how I was in a Barnes & Noble and saw Eye of the World and I liked blue, so I picked it on up and that's how I started my Wheel of Time journey. This is the exact thing that caught my eye. This is the one. I have it all these years later. It was the box CD set, and then Michael Kramer and Kate Redding's voices entered my life. But with the evidence that's recently come out, we as fans have reason to believe the show could be dropping at the end of the year in 2021. A Wheel of Time live action show with a massive budget could be coming out in a matter of months. And for literally years here on the channel, I have been saying right before the show comes out, I will do a reread with my fans. And this is the start of it now. Every 2 weeks, I will be doing a Friday review of another Wheel of Time book. So we are starting today with a spoiler talk of The Eye of the World. Full spoilers for The Eye of the World. I'll be going in depth about what I do and do not like about this book, how I think it sits within the series, but I will be avoiding any and all spoilers that continue on after Eye of the World to give you time to read and catch up. That does mean you have the hefty reading assignment within the next 2 weeks getting through books 1 and 2 of the Wheel of Time, but you know, that's your problem, not mine. God, why is there so much cat hair everywhere? Jesus! So this is, without exaggeration, one of the most talked about first books in a fantasy series in existence. And fans are generally pretty positive on it, and it tells what I would say is the most typical fantasy story we get within the Wheel of Time. Though it does take a few books for the Wheel of Time to really break away from a lot of the fantasy tropes it's heavily rooted in. Here we have the most typical heroes setting off journey I think Fantasy of the Time could really even provide. Robert Jordan heavily steeped this first book in the well-known, tried and true approach to telling a fantasy story of that era, and let's go ahead and walk through it. So this story kicks off in a prologue that shows us the previous Dragon Reborn, Lews-Therin Telamon, living his last moments, where he is confronted by one of the former Forsaken and shown what his madness has resulted in. He has killed his own family, and that's a pretty dark end to him. He then commits suicide with the magical ability of Saidin and creates Dragon Mountain, massive mountain within the middle of this world that now is just a scar on the land. On the first read of this series, this scene is hella confusing. I've had so many people tell me that throughout the years, and I even still remember to this day when I was like 11 or 12 and first read it, and I was confused too. I almost put it down. Oh my God, how different would my life be if I did? Don't think about that. But this right here is such a textbook awesome example of one of Robert Jordan's greatest strengths as a writer, and that is setting things up that pay off upon rereads or just realizations you have later on in the series. This scene, upon first entry, admittedly, it's rough. You're like, the f just happened? That's why I think if they're starting the show with this scene, they're gonna have to be really careful and present it well, because it could be super confusing and you don't necessarily want your initiating, oh, here, welcome to our world, for your mainstream audience who's probably never even heard of Wheel of Time before they start it, just going, But as just book 1 unfurls, and if you are paying close attention, you understand exactly what you witness in this prologue, and it is an important, well-executed, hefty scene. I could understand people saying, like, still too weird, too abrupt an entry, but I like it, especially because I'm someone who has the benefit of loving rereading these books. I've been through this one more times than I'm willing to admit, and that scene just hits every time. Don't worry, this is not gonna be a gushing review. I have negatives to say. But from there we kick into our main protagonist for this book's life, Rand al'Thor. We see him on a backcountry road with his father on their way into town to sell their goods. They are farmers. They have a harvest to bring to town to sell for Winter's Night, a local holiday. And Rand, he's all nervous about his love interest, Egwene. It's so typical fantasy. It just It's like a comforting warm blanket. You're like, yes, this is this. But it's important to note, Robert Jordan knew what he was doing. He even says in a post-interview, I believe that's in these CDs, that he wanted to essentially retell a Lord of the Rings type story, but have a more realistic approach to writing the country characters that initiate it all. He doesn't believe that a country bumpkin would want to go on this grand epic journey, and instead they would have to be forced to. They'd be much more reluctant. They would be stubborn. And boy, does that word play a role in all the country characters that exist in this story. Rand al'Thor, our protagonist walking with his father Tam, notices a stranger on the road who is cloaked in black and scary as hell. Robert Jordan flexes his already admittedly really strong writing abilities here. I think he improved as the series progresses, but right away, he writes a creepy, eerie feeling sequence that lets you know there are threats in this world that are going to be supernatural. If that magical display you just saw wasn't enough, don't worry, here's some more hints at some magical things. He glanced over his shoulder and blinked. Not more than 20 spans back down the road, a cloaked figure on horseback followed them. A horse and rider alike black, dull and ungleaming. It was more habit than anything that kept him walking backward alongside the cart, even while he looked. The rider's cloak covered him to his boot tops. The cowl tugged well forward, so no part of him showed. Vaguely, Rand thought there was something odd about the horseman, but it was the shadowed opening of the hood that fascinated him. He could see only the vaguest outlines of a face, but he had the feeling he was looking right into the rider's eyes. And he could not look away. Queasiness settled in his stomach. There was only shadow to see in the hood, but he felt hatred, as sharply as if he could see a snarling face. Hatred for everything that lived. Hatred for him most of all, and for him above all things. But after leaving this rider behind, they manage to get into town, and we meet the full cast of characters and are introduced to our Two Rivers party. We have some strangers that are new to town, Moraine Damodred, who was unveiled to be an Aes Sedai, her warder bodyguard, Lanman Dragarin, who, the most badass character ever conceived. Possibly. And I'll get more into Aes Sedai later on, but let's focus on the rest. We have Perine Barra, a local blacksmith who falls right into the trope of the large, quiet, cautious type. We have Nynaeve, the town wisdom, who is very much so dealing with a lot of responsibility for her age, and upon first impressions, usually everyone does not like Nynaeve. She is someone who, in my first, I think, two reads of the series, I didn't love that much. But now, upon better understanding her and honestly growing up and maturing as a person and having people who are younger than me that I care about, I understand her motivations and fears so much more, and I love her. Anyway, then we also have Egwene, her apprentice and Rand al'Thor's introduced love interest, who has just a lot of what you expect here, but luckily she grows into a phenomenal character that exceeds just the love interest trope. And Mat Cauthon. Mat, there's no reason to love him yet in this book, and it's so strange seeing it's one of the few things you could like easily criticize early Wheel of Time books for. Mat is just for the first couple books, and then he becomes amazing. But yeah, Mat here, he's just like the town scoundrel. Oh, and Tom Marilyn, the Gleeman, someone I used to hold in such high regard, but over time he's good. I don't love him as much as I used to. He's good. Those are the characters we must care about, and we have a nice little romp around this town. But as we all know, Rand al'Thor and his father go home for the night after dropping off their crop and are attacked by Trollocs. Tam shows Rand that he actually has a Blade Master's sword, showing us that Tam subtly has one of the most badass backstories in all of the Wheel of Time, but you don't get to know the details of that yet. And Rand has a run-in with a Trolloc that talks. That never comes up again. There's just one super intelligent Trolloc that Rand kills. Trollocs were evolving, and Rand single-handedly set them back. But Rand manages to drag his wounded father into town and sees that Emmons Field, the town he grew up in, is
burning to the ground
as a Trolloc attack is making its way through his village. Luckily, Moraine and her warder, Lan, have just come out showing how badass they are and massacring the Trolloc invasion. And the town folks themselves also fought, showing us some foreshadowing. And I'm not going to be this detailed for the rest of the book, but from there we have Moiraine give one of my favorite speeches in the history of fantasy. She convinces all the cast of characters I mentioned before, except for Tam, to go on out of the village, and we have quite the journey. We're taken to magnificent cities like Camelin. We are told of extravagant elements to this fantasy world, and I love, 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 love it. If you'd like a full summary of this book, I'll have my summary video linked down below, but let's go ahead and talk about the full review. So I wanted to get into all that setup stuff to have a really clear painting of Robert Jordan knowing what he is doing, having a super cliche start to a fantasy story, right? Like everything I mentioned there is fantasy of that time. Where I think Eye of the World manages to stand out is the characters and their relationships. While they are set up to be the tropes we know and love, already in book 1, he is subverting them fairly aggressively. And what we see is characters like Rand, instead of being subservient to Moiraine or just like accepting her authority over him, even the other Emmonsfielders around him, he's going like, no, and hating that he's having to go on this journey. Same thing with Nynaeve, who shows up. She does not want this to be happening and is actively trying to get them all to go home for a while. And that grounds this story in a way that is not unheard of as fantasy, but is not super common either. And I love it. It makes me relate and feel to this entire party oh so much more. And I, upon rereading Eye of the World, have gone through cycles where I like, oh, this is clearly Robert Jordan's weakest writing. He gets better as a writer from here, but he's still damn good. Like, he's still wonderful prose that a lot of people write off, but he does the Sanderson approach where I believe there's a lot of simplicity to what he puts forth, but there's also so much beauty, and the practical nature of the soul of his writing really allows you, the reader, to feel the more country lens I believe we're supposed to be being told this story through. And there is a bit of a disconnect whenever we do down later in the series have POVs from people who don't share that. I think the writing style changes intentionally. We are watching the world through Rand al'Thor's eyes through the vast majority of this book, so of course it makes sense that the story's being told in a rather country bumpkin way. He's a sheep herder, damn it. All right, goobers and gobsnappers, real quickly I'd like to talk about each individual plot within Eye of the World and give my overall thoughts on it. First up, we have Perrin Aybara learning he is a wolf brother. One of the greatest mystery elements in this book. Absolutely adore it, and it really lets you know, oh, there's more than just this one magic system in play, which just sets an expectation, opens the door, cracks the egg, slivers the slide, hinting at just how big the Wheel of Time is going to become. Because that's one of the things, Eye of the World does not do the size of the world justice in comparison to just how much this series grows and grows. Next plot line, Nynaeve and Moraine's little rivalry. It's just not the best in this book specifically. I like what it becomes. I like the little seedlings of Nynaeve's growth that come from here. Her rivalry with Aes Sedai as a whole, while learning she can channel. But in this book, it's not my favorite, if I'm being completely honest. But it's still fine. Egwene learning she can channel. Fine, it's good. I definitely love Egwene's character, but it's not necessarily this book that makes me fall in love with her. That is yet to come. This is such a Rand-centric book that really not too many of the characters I'm feeling much about, aside from him right away. On rereads, obviously, I adore them from the beginning. Mat and Rand being homeless. Some people really hate this. I think it's fine, and I really enjoy, in fact, I think I love one element from it, and that's showing isolation and what the pressure on Rand and Mat is doing to them. It's forcing them to be so uncomfortable, so out of their element, and separating them from the party, having them being with Tom, having them being actually Tom taken away from that one safety net, even gone. Their encounter with the Murdral. It's not consistently the most engaging, but this subplot, it has maybe some of the best moments throughout the entire book. And then it also leads to Rand being in Camelin, sitting on Dim Dare Wall, watching Logain, and that's a great scene. Love the fact that Logain sees Rand at all that distance and just starts losing it. Oh boy, can't get into stuff because spoilers, but This scene is wonderful. And then we get Rand meeting Elaine, which apparently might not be happening in season 1 of the show, due to Rafe Judkins putting this on his Instagram. What do you think? Let me know. And how could I get through this whole video without mentioning Loyal? The actual best thing in all of the Wheel of Time. A gentle giant scholar that just bleeds personality and can you up. We all love Loyal. He doesn't have the most agency. He's definitely just there as like a support most of the time, but he's just an example of Robert Jordan's phenomenal character work, because you would die for him within like 2 sentences of meeting him. I would say the weaknesses come through in this book with the pacing a bit. The Eye of the World is not the smoothest Wheel of Time book, but it's not bad by any means. I think it doesn't quite have the flow of something like a Knife of Dreams. And the final larger criticism would be the ending. So full spoilers to the actual ending of Eye of the World. Robert Jordan, this is something I go as far as to say I hope they change it for the show, because this is a clear sign Robert Jordan did not have his world building, in my opinion, fully developed yet. There are things here that, in my interpretation, directly contradict elements to this fantasy world set up later on. The Green Man as well just feels extremely out of place. There's not really much else in this world that matches him. It's just strange. I still have no idea what this voice is. It is not here. I will take no part. Only the chosen one can do what must be done, if he will. Not here. Was that the create? That's And Rand's final showdown with the Forsaken that he has to deal with feels like it shouldn't have gone the way it did. It's just like this rush through. It does match the fact that like Forsaken are just incompetent as a whole, but he manages to just fumble his way into essentially taking out one of the most powerful people in known existence. That's not a great look, though I do like that Moiraine, it fits her character very well. I love in this final showdown where like the Forsaken are there, Moraine's like, time to murder motherfuckers. It just goes and like just kills one of them using some sketchy shit I won't get into because spoilers, and that's great. I love how much that actually fits her character, because Moiraine is a rule breaker in a lot of ways. She's someone who is going to do what she believes is right. She's going to do the sacrifice call or the greater good call, and Moiraine, knowing what you know about her, if you've read entirely the series, going back and seeing what she's having to deal with here and her patience, it's just awesome. There are a few nuggets for Matt's character that just let you know what he's going to be in the future. The fact that Moiraine explicitly tells him, like, we're in a cursed city. This is horrifying. Shardar Logoth is not to be messed around with. Don't do anything stupid. And he's like, I'm gonna go treasure hunting and take this knife. One of the complaints you'll hear from people that I actually do disagree with is that the main cast of characters is stubborn and stupid and bullheaded. They're kids, largely. Like, they're still, like, what, 18, 19, 20? Some of them as young as 16. They're not at a mature, smart, developed part of who they are yet. They're supposed to be dumb, and they're being brought from their sheltered country village life into the real world filled with all kinds of terrors. That is just good characterization for me, but I understand if that's just not the type of character you like to follow. But watching them grow from these idiots at the start into the forces of nature they become later on is one of my joys of the Wheel of Time series. Rereadability is one of the great pleasures of being a Wheel of Time fan, and maybe just because it's the first book, or it actually is just filled with the most interesting nuggets, but Eye of the World might be the best example of that. The nightmares Rand deals with, as well as the rest of the party, the slow revealing of just the monolithic elements within this world at play, the just beautiful introduction. Moiraine is, without question, the best example of how to properly write someone who is steeped in the world to be an introductory guide for the reader while simultaneously the main cast. She just serves that flawlessly. It's something some people do avoid because it is, again, a wizard trope, having them be the person who gives the exposition, but if you're going to do it, this is the way to do it. I wish I fully remembered what my first impression of Moiraine was like going through this book, because I don't. All I know now is upon my rereads how she strikes me, knowing what I know now, as this rule breaker, this person who's willing to go to the extreme, do what must be done. So if this is your first read through of Eye of the World, let me know what you think of Moiraine in the comments down below, because I don't get that perspective anymore, and I really wish I did. And now just a couple more random elements. The Shadow Spawn are just fantastic. Thrakar, Murdral, Trollocs. They are, again, doing what Robert Jordan wants to, being the typical cannon fodder evil monsters, but they have such a distinct look to them. They are so clearly taken from Tolkien, but they are heavily transformed to not only be different, but also fit the elements at play within this world. There is a history to them, there is a reason to them, and it works. And in my most recent reread, I picked up on a few more of the hints towards the technological advanced past that used to exist in this world that I had not noticed before. They're just constantly there. This is one of the first instances I'm aware of a fantasy world that does not feel modern, but has a history that was futuristic. And so there's still these things just strewn about that exist, and you occasionally catch them and are like, wow, that's weird, that's suspicious. And like a first-time reader will never catch those. It's great. Robert Jordan just knew how to put those eggs in. And overall, I would give Eye of the World a very solid 8 out of 10. I get the complaints some people have, but I'm steeped in Wheel of Time, and with everything I know, this rests at a very good 8. Alright, but this has just been my review of Eye of the World. Come back in 2 weeks when I will be doing The Great Hunt, and like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreons, Morass OO Jr. and Rosalind.